1977, and for the first time, Formula One would consist of 17 races. A long season then, beginning in Argentina, in spite of the uncertain political and economic situation. While several important transfers had taken place at the end of the previous season, it was already known that Carlos Reutemann was to join Niki Lauda at Ferrari, and it also became apparent that Ronnie Peterson was going to Tyrrell because Jody Scheckter had surprised everyone by moving to a brand new team, Wolf. Well, at Brabham, John Watson replaced Reutemann, where his teammate was Carlos Pace. Clay Regazzoni had found refuge at the very last moment in the Ensign team. While still basking in the glory of the world title that he'd acquired just 3 months earlier in Japan, James Hunt took the first pole of this 28th Formula One season. Well, Watson beside him on the front row, whilst behind then De Peye and Lauda, whose relations with Ferrari were no longer what they had been. During the warm-ups, the Lotus and Ligier teams had suffered from engine breakdowns and were not starting the season in the best conditions. Well, there was in fact only one Lotus at the start, driven by Mario Andretti. The Grand Prix got underway at 4 p.m. local time, and despite that, the track temperature was in excess of 50 degrees Celsius. Add to that the fact that this was the first race of the season. It meant that abandonments were going to be numerous. While in the front, James Hunt had seemed to have done the most difficult part, and then he came off the track after breaking his rear suspension. John Watson, who obviously thought he'd take over the flame, let down by his gearbox. Lauda has abandoned. Pace is held back by a cooling problem. And to sum up, everything plays into the incredible Jody Scheckter's hands on board the Wolf. Well, in its very first race, the team belonging to this Canadian of Austrian origins, a specialist in offshore petrol research platform construction, won the race. One of the biggest surprises in the history of Formula One. Two weeks later, and this is Interlagos. The weather still just as hot since the first Grand Prix. The Ferraris have now added the Fiat trademark to their flanks, but the internal situation, well, it's tense. At Tyrrell, they're still trying to develop their famous six-wheeled car, Jackie Stewart, often there. The warm-ups were marked by Mario Andretti's terrible accident. The engine blew up and caught fire. The American just had time to escape from his burning car. At Ferrari, they added a new rear spoiler, but only to Reutemann's car, a miracle solution that immediately allows the Argentinian to gain a second and a half. As a result, after the warm-ups, Reutemann is on the front row next to James Hunt, who had claimed pole once again, whilst Lauda has to be content with the 13th best time. Well, things are even worse for Scheckter, the winner of the first Grand Prix, who's only on 15th spot, whilst Emerson Fittipaldi, the local hero, 16th. Well, luckily for the Brazilian supporters, Carlos Pace is also there at the start and even manages to lead for the first 6 laps. Hunt then takes over and remains in the lead for 16 laps. Behind him, Reutemann, Mas, Andretti, Regazzoni and De Peye, all waiting to pounce. So all running smoothly for most, but no luck on this day for Jody Scheckter. Yes, Scheckter was to retire during the 12th lap when his engine failed. Turns into a wholesale slaughter when Andretti also retires during the 20th lap. In all, out of 22 cars at the start, only 7 finish. 15 abandonments then, 9 through accident. In the end, victory goes to Carlos Reutemann, who led for the last 18 laps. The Argentinian takes his first victory for Ferrari, where he's clearly the darling compared to Lauda, whose premature abandonment in the Japanese Grand Prix in 1976 had clearly unsettled the team. Nonetheless, Lauda did finish in third place, but 1 minute and 47 seconds behind his teammate. Hunt second, Fittipaldi a superb fourth, Gunnar Nielsen in a Lotus was fifth, and Renzo Zorzi in a Shadow snatches a point for sixth place. After the Grand Prix, everyone kept busy with the broken vehicles. And in South Africa, starting off with a great moment on boards of this Kalami circuit with Patrick Depailler and the six-wheeled Tyrrell. In the warm-ups, James Hunt took his third consecutive pole. He's ahead of Carlos Pace, Niki Lauda and Depailler. Well, immediately after the start, Lauda starts pushing very hard behind Hunt's McLaren, followed by Scheckter and Depailler, who are waiting for their chance. From the 7th to the 78 laps, the Ferrari gets in front, and that is the last we see of it. The race is marked by a terrible accident. Renzo Zorzi's Shadow is at a standstill on the track, its engine smoking. Two officials rush towards it, crossing the track from the other side, and tragedy strikes. The second official is struck by the second Shadow, which is accelerating hard, driven by the Welshman, Tom Price. Well, the official is killed instantly, as is Price, whose helmet is almost ripped off by the official's fire extinguisher. A nightmare scenario in which the Shadow continues in its trajectory and rams the Ligier driven by Jacques Laffite, who's struck by the driver who's already dead. The 5th of March 1977 saw one of the most appalling accidents in the history of Formula One. Lauda won the race despite everything and described it as one of his greatest victories. Scheckter second in front of Depailler, Hunt, Mass and Watson. A few days later, and another shock for Formula One. Carlos Pace is killed in a plane crash. He was replaced at Long Beach by the German driver Hans Stuck. Jean-Pierre Jarier driving an ATS that was in fact a former Penske machine. So Stuck made his debut for Brabham, replacing Pace. A difficult start for him, and he only qualified in 16th place. Everything was going well for Lauda though, and continuing in the same vein as Kyalami, he took pole in front of Mario Andretti. The start chaotic, Reutemann pulling away, Hunt getting into Watson's Brabham. Further back, Brambilla remains on the grid. Well, after that eventful start, Scheckter, Andretti and Lauda all break away, Laffite leading the field. Well, the race was marked by Schecter's domination as he led for 76 of the 80 laps. but Andretti and Lauda never let the South African get away, showing that they could take advantage at any moment should the occasion arise. And so it was that poor old Scheckter was caught. His front tyre had a slow puncture and he just couldn't keep up the pace. The end of the race was full of suspense between these three men. The rest of the field's more than a minute behind. Well, 4 laps from the end, Scheckter blew out. Andretti and Lauda got past. This was Andretti's 3rd Grand Prix victory, but the most special for him on home ground. Back in Europe for the 5th race of the season, took place at Jarama in Spain. In the championship, the situation was as follows. Scheckter and Lauda were in the lead with 19 points, followed by Reutemann 6 points behind, and Andretti 8 down. Well, right from the first warm-ups, it was Andretti that showed that he was near untouchable. It was already clear that apart from the American driver's talent, he had already won at Indianapolis in 1969. The secret of his success lay in his car, the Lotus 78. Well, the latter had introduced a new concept that was to revolutionise Formula One in the following years. It was known as a wing car. It actually used an inversed aeroplane wing principle to create not lift, but downdraft using an overturned wing profile. Well, the warm-ups were also marked by the drama for Niki Lauda, who suddenly felt a sharp pain in his back. In fact, he'd just re-broken one of the 2 ribs that he'd fractured in his accident at the Nürburgring the year before. On the Sunday morning, the Austrian had to pull out of the race, an event that could prove crucial in the championship. As a result, Andretti's declared adversary for the victory was no other than Jacques Laffite, who had qualified superbly in 2nd place. Well, the Spaniard participating in this Grand Prix, Emilio Villota, managed to qualify in 2nd last place in a McLaren M23. Yes, the official team had in fact been testing the new M26, but weren't satisfied with Hunt's time, which was 7th best. As expected, the race was marked by Mario Andretti's domination. Out on his own throughout, Laffite and Reutemann tried to keep up, but can't rival him. Worse, the Frenchman had to return suddenly to the pits with a loose wheel rim. Laffite had to be content with finishing 7th, a lap behind Andretti. Well, the only thing to stop the depression overtaking the blue team was the best race lap produced by the JS7. 2nd consecutive victory then for Andretti, which tightened things up in the championship since 4 drivers were within just 4 points of each other.